But I thought that was nice. This is a nice photo. The woman in the photo looks pretty fearless to me. Looks like she's standing high, ready for anything. And that's kind of how we ought to be in our life. There's a thing that goes on with our computers. It's called, well, I guess there's no real name for it, but there's when an application is running in the background. You're familiar with that? It's something you don't see, but it's there and it's doing something. It's consuming resources on the computer. And often those are good things. They're maybe keeping your clock running or something. I don't know what all they do. They're a mystery to me as well. But they say if you want to save, some of your resources, your memory and all that, to shut some of those off. Well, I don't even know how to do it. I don't know where they are. I don't know anything about it. So all of us have one of those, a background application or an application running in the background, and that application is fear. A lot of us carry fear even when there's nothing to be afraid of. It's become a habit. It's a state of mind that we've accepted as, I guess, normal. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the fact is that we carry this level of stress with us. And I think a lot of it is just due to the fact that we are in a body living on this planet, that from a spiritual perspective, we have no fear. But we are in a mechanical body. We're in a physical body. And we have a lot of needs, and we are spending most of our time addressing those needs, thinking about those needs. And you can just kind of think about what you've thought about over the last 15 minutes or so, and you'll see a lot of it is body related. And if you multiply that by the day or weeks or months or years, you'll see that a lot of your time, a lot of my time has been spent thinking about the body and wondering how we're going to get it someplace or feed it or dress it up or whatever we need to do with the body. But a lot of attention is going there. And so there's this kind of this undercurrent of fear. And it's not that we're all scared to death that we're not going to make it on time someplace or anything like that. It's just it's kind of being on guard. It's hard to define it, but it's kind of the knot in the stomach thing, that it's there, and when you sit down to relax and let go, when you consciously do that, you feel all this stress begin to leave your body. And that's the evidence that the fear is there. Stress is fear. It's a manifestation of fear. We just let that program run in the background nearly all the time. Maybe when we go to sleep at night, we let go of it. But then when you have a real bad dream, I think it kicks back in. Get involved in things in your dreams even, which doesn't really seem fair. If you have a problem in your life and you go to sleep hoping for a little rest, and then you dream about the problem, and it's 10 times worse than it was when you woke up, so you're glad you're awake and the problem's not so big. Anyway, so we have this thing going on, and what's interesting is that Paul pointed out, and this is one of my favorite scriptures, I've quoted many times, passages. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear is not normal from a spiritual perspective. And this is a very important statement because we are spiritual beings. This is what we truly are. And so when we're experiencing fear, we're experiencing something that we are not. And for most of us, that's kind of a strange thing to say or think about. Because how can I not be the person that is feeling fear at this moment? And that's where the spiritual understanding comes in. That we make a distinction between who we are at the deepest level of our being. I'm a spiritual being, expressing on this planet As Teilhard de Chardin said, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, not the other way around, a human being seeking to have a spiritual experience. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. If that's true, then I was not given a spirit of fear. And it is true. I was not given a spirit of fear. And you can actually prove this to yourself. When you're in a situation and you are terrified by it, and if you let it go, if you just sit down and begin to relax and let it go and say, I've been here before, this is not going to destroy me, and you'll just kind of go through an intellectual, emotional processing and actually change your mind, change your experience in that moment, you can prove to yourself that the peace you think your fear is taken away from you is still present. Not only were you not given a spirit of fear, but you were not given a spirit of anxiety. Our true state is peace. And for me to stand up here and talk like this, what I realize I'm doing is just making an intellectual statement that fear comes from a deep emotional place. And so I can't tell you and I can't tell myself how to get rid of it. But if we understand what it is, that helps us to let it go. I was not given a spirit of fear. You were not given a spirit of fear. You don't have any fear at the spiritual level. And you know why that is. Because as a spiritual being, you can't be destroyed. You can't be harmed. There's nothing about your spiritual essence that can be hurt. It's never been hungry, it's never been poor, it's never been lost, it's never been sad. All of that is surface stuff. At the deepest level, we were not given a spirit of fear. We're not given a spirit of limitation of any kind whatsoever. That's not our nature. So when I'm afraid, I'm not being myself. I'm not being true to myself. So that is sort of helpful when you're afraid. And I say sort of helpful because it's pretty hard to, when you're afraid, to pull yourself out of that and to say, this is not me, this is not real. This is not who I am at the deepest level. But what I will say is that's quite possible to do. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's not possible. So if you're involved in something right now that's got your attention in a negative way, you're afraid, just kind of hear some of this stuff and try to understand that the you that seems to be afraid is not you at all. It's not your spiritual self. It's not your true self. So what we do is we migrate out to the surface of our being. That's where the fear takes place. That's the prodigal son out in the far country. All kinds of reasons to be afraid and upset. We are to pull ourselves back to come home, to pull ourselves back to our spiritual center, because we were not given a spirit of fear. When we're home, we're not afraid. We can't experience fear. So it's a good thing to keep in mind, even though it's difficult, is when I'm afraid, this is not who I really am. This is not my true self. When will the day come when I'll be my true self? When will I be so strong that I can always be my true self? That won't come in a day, but it can come in the twinkling of an eye. Because your soul is never diminished, your true self is never diminished, even by your worst fear. No matter how far away you go from your spiritual home is still here. And that's the important thing. You weren't given a spirit of fear, come home. That's the message. Is it possible? What's holding you out in the far country? You know, this is what we ask ourselves. What's holding me out here? Why do I need to be out here and beat myself up or let this situation beat me up? Why can't I just turn and arise and go to the Father, come home? What is keeping me from doing that? What I say in the book, in my book, the complete soul, is there are no natural barriers between where you are in a negative way and where you want to be. No natural barriers between yourself and the far country and your home. The only thing that kept the prodigal son in the far country was what? Was there some requirement he had to be out there? The only thing that kept him out there was himself. There are no natural barriers keeping us out in the far country of fear. So that's a very important thing to remember. What stands between myself, my self-awareness, and my peace of mind? That place where I was not given a spirit of fear. And the answer is always nothing. What we say to ourselves, though, is, well, there is something that stands between myself and my peace of mind, and that's the resolution of this problem. As soon as that neighbor moves, I'll be happy. As soon as I get that raise, I'll be totally prosperous. As soon as that change of healing comes in my body, I'll be at peace. As soon as something happens, I'll regain my spirit of fearlessness. So we're putting a condition on it. But there are no natural barriers. None of that stuff stands between ourselves and the peace that we want. And that is a very difficult thing to grasp, because we have been so trained, so programmed to think that things stand between where we are now and where we want to be. And that's why I debunked the whole idea of soul evolution. Your soul is just fine. Your soul is complete. It's the far country that's the problem. It's the self-image, the far country of the surface self. That's where the problems are. That's where the wars take place. The whole Revelation thing, the Armageddon thing, is all about that. It's about dealing with understanding this great war that's going on between all the multiple selves that I have created and generated. So when do these wars end? When do I come home? When I resolve all my problems? Have you ever resolved all your problems? I bet every one of us have resolved all of our problems at some point. And is that it? We resolved them once and for all, and we never had any more? I think you could resolve every problem you have today, come back here in a year, no, come back here tomorrow, and you'll have just about as many. Resolving problems isn't what the spiritual path is all about, but we make it about that. When I resolve these problems, I'll be considered spiritually prosperous. I'll be healthy. I'll be whole. I'll be happy. But Revelation reminds us there will always be wars and rumors of wars. And what's that mean? It means there's always the opportunity to leave home, leave the center of our being, and go out into the far country. There's always that enticement. There's always that opportunity. And as soon as we get out there, suddenly we have some more problems to resolve. We have to get home. Or we have to try to fix whatever is fluttering around out there. And I'm kind of making light of this, but it's true with all of us. We all do this to ourselves all the time. You don't need a real problem to have a problem. Have you ever noticed that? Somebody can look at you a certain way, and you don't even know what they're thinking, but you know what they're thinking. They don't like your hat, or they don't like your coat, or they don't like your makeup, or they don't like your glasses. They don't like something about you. And they're probably thinking about their daughter that just ran away from home. Have you ever been thinking about something, staring out into space, and you wake up and you're looking right at somebody? You can have a problem without having a problem. We've all proven that. It just takes a little bit of imagination. So when do we resolve that? We not only have to resolve all the problems, the actual problems in our lives, we have to resolve the imaginary problems. So that means we really have a lot of work to do. We have to reel in the imagination. What if you realize that none of that matters? That you are a spiritual being, that center of peace is always there, that core, that home is always there. Nothing has to happen. There are no natural barriers between where you are now and where you want to be. There's no evolution that has to take place. There's only a choice, only a decision. As I say in that book also, the road that we follow going out into the far country is exactly the same road we take coming home. But it's a totally different perspective. You don't have to learn anything new. You're already on the road, already on that path. We think we have to get more information, learn more about God, learn more about ourselves, learn more about spiritual things, read more books, add more information to our mind, to our intellectual understanding. And there's not so much wrong with that as it can actually become a barrier. Because we're saying, I don't feel so good, I'm not there yet, so I must lack something. And that's an affirmation that is absolutely untrue. But it is an affirmation, and we believe it's true, so we will act as if it is. And that's what fear is. It's acting as if a thing is true that is not. And yes, there are challenging situations, happen all the time. And it's really easy to do a knee-jerk reaction of fear. But if you've ever noticed, you get over the fear and you roll up your sleeves and get to work, the fear leaves. When you can actually do something about your situation, the fear is diminished. And the reason that's true is because you're pulling out from your true self, your center. Action has a great way of reducing fear. So fear doesn't require facts to do its unsettling work. Any hypothetical scenario will do. Somebody could call you with some false information and tell you something that's simply not true, and you could have the same reaction. Well, a better example of this is when I was little, I used to be terrified of the bear under the bed. Did you ever have a bear under your bed? It didn't matter that the bed was only like 6 inches off the ground. There was a huge bear under there. Somehow he fit under that bed. So your rational mind shuts off and your emotion takes over. But there's no way a bear could ever get under any bed I've ever slept in. But I had the same experience as if there was one. And it's fear. And in a case like that, it's not just fear as a child, it's terror. It takes fear to a new level. You think of all the things that would have had to take place for a bear to be able to get under my bed. But the logical mind doesn't deal with that stuff. It just accepts that there's a bear under the bed. And it turns that acceptance, that vision, into fear. There's no logical, no rational reason that we should hang on to something like that. But we do. The basis of fear is the perception that someone or something has the power to rob us of a thing we value. Okay, this is a little bit of analysis. The basis of fear is not reality, it's perception. Because our spiritual nature, our soul, can never be robbed of a thing we value. Our soul can never be diminished. Nothing can harm our soul. It's indestructible. So we have this fear, and the fear is operating at a surface level. So we pull ourselves back, and that It's not to say that if you are in the woods and you encounter a bear, you're not going to experience some fear. Fear works in a positive way as well, and that's self-preservation. It's not the bear in the woods that you got to worry about. It's the bear under the bed. That's the one that gets you. I've only encountered a couple of bears in the woods in my life, but I've encountered hundreds under my bed. The basis of fear is the perception that someone or something has the power to rob us of a thing we value. Just think about that. It's a reaction thinking that something important is being taken away or challenged or threatened in some way. And so we take a moment to understand that that's not true. Can they take away your dignity? Can they take away your power? Maybe they can strip you of all material belongings, but can they harm you? And I'm not saying let's give it a test, but I'm saying let's move into ourselves in a way that regains the understanding that no one can take from us what we are. We'll never lose that. I think that's the whole one of the messages with the crucifixion, story of the crucifixion, if you look at it metaphorically. Jesus gave everything. He lost everything. It looked like the world won. They took from him everything he had. But the story does not end there. Whether you take it literally or metaphorically, the point is the story does not end there. It's the caterpillar weaving the cocoon. It looks like all is lost, but something larger emerges. And in the story with Jesus, it was the Christ. It was something beyond the human level that emerged. And that same process occurs in all of us. What Jesus was demonstrating, or what the story demonstrates, is that life is unkillable. You can't take life. And in a sense, all of the adversaries of Jesus set him free, set his life free. That's the story. That's what we look at in ourselves, this process of dying to the old and being resurrected and ascending as a new. It's a conscious shift in perception. I'm not this fearful self, in other words. I die to this. I let myself die to this. And I rise as an eternal being. And then I deal with the problem from a place of power. I'm really okay. And you'll notice that when you are quaking in your boots trying to handle a situation, you don't do so well. But when you go down the road a ways and you say enough is enough, I'm not going to react to this out of fear anymore. You find your center of power and you take charge of the situation. You handle it differently. It's not a good idea to try to solve a problem when you're scared to death. When you get past that fear, when you find your point of power, then go after it. And it'll almost resolve itself. And that's not always easy to do. You can be going through a major life change. Maybe you're going through a divorce or something that you've been doing for a long time, and it's a whole lifestyle built around life with another person, and that suddenly ends. You feel like you're out there all by yourself. But you're not. And you find yourself, you find that center of power, and you say, well, this self is going to live on this planet successfully. This is the self that's going to live and do this stuff now. A change has occurred. I have gone through an external change. But I'm still okay. I'm still here. And you find your center of power, you handle the whole situation in a much different way. But if you are quaking in your boots now in fear, don't beat yourself up for that. That just adds to the problem. But understand you'll pass through this. This will pass. And you'll find your point of strength. You'll find your center of strength because you were not given a spirit of fear. You're given a spirit of sound mind, and power, and love. And you find that. Once you go through all this outer stuff, you come home, you come back to that center. Find your place of power. And then you look at your situation again from a different perspective. You take a deep breath and say, this is a new life. I'm okay. Not only are you okay, there's more of you surfacing than you've allowed to surface for quite a while, probably. Because we all experience fear, we may have treated it as a universal condition over which we have little or no control, and often that's handled through medication, antidepressants, and different ways of dealing with fear. It's so accepted. It's accepted by the medical profession. It's accepted by most all of us. It's a natural part of our society. Or I should say it's a normal part of our society. So we're in good company. We say, I'm living with high anxiety. You know, we're putting our kids on these things. And they live in high anxiety all the time. The battery of their cell phone runs down or something like that. It's very stressful. There's all kinds of reasons to stress out. And the remedy is just to fix it at a surface level. To address it not by going home, but by trying to rearrange the furniture out in the far country to make it look a little bit more palatable. So we treat it as it's normal. Everybody experiences it, so it must be normal. If we accept that our spiritual core is one of power, love, and a sound mind, then we see fear as an unnatural response to a given situation. And this is actually true. To say that fear is normal is not the same thing as saying it's natural. The normal response is what everybody's doing. The natural response is what happens when we find our center of power. That's our natural response. And we need to stop calling normal natural. It's not the same thing. Everybody does one thing, and what we're talking about here is very unusual. Not many people have discovered the ability to find peace in themselves, to find their center of peace. And we all find it and lose it. That's also normal, but it is not natural. Our natural state is one of peace. It's one of power. It's one of knowing the truth, that we're not given a spirit of fear. So we might accept fear as our normal reaction, but Paul points out that fear is not the natural reaction of one centered in their spiritual power, grounded in love, anchored in the clarity of a sound mind. When you reach a place of peace in yourself, you may still see a whole turmoil of events around you. And your best friend could come up to you and say, how can you be so peaceful at a time like this? Because they watch the storm, they see the storm. It's not normal for a person to be peaceful in the midst of a storm. Again, the whole story of Jesus on the boat with the disciples. A big storm comes up, they're all freaked out. And he's asleep. And they're angry at him because he's not worried. What's your problem? Why aren't you worried? And he speaks to the waves, peace be still. His waves were never rolling. They were all in the same boat, but they were not having the same experience. So everyone around us can be having a reaction to something, and we find our center of power. We don't have that same reaction. We're experiencing the natural level of our being, the natural level of our soul. So we've got a series of affirmations here. I'd like you to join me and say them. The first one at the top was, I was not given a spirit of fear. Let's say that together. I was not given a spirit of fear. My spirit is powerful and I'm guided by love. Let's say it again. My spirit is powerful and I'm guided by love. With every one of these, think about something in your life. Your spirit is powerful, filled with power, and you are right now being guided by love. My mind is sound and secure in the truth that greater good is now unfolding in my life. Let's do it again. My mind is sound and secure in the truth that greater good is now unfolding in my life. Just think about that. I was talking to someone the other day that was going through something, and I said, right now, greater good is unfolding in your life. Even with this stuff that's going on, this is all part of that process. And what we do is we lock on to some picture, something that's happening, and we forget that the greater good is unfolding because we're not coming from our fearlessness. We're being controlled by the appearance. So my mind is sound and secure in the truth that greater good is now unfolding in my life. Very powerful thought. Especially if we make that transition to the actual experience. Take it out of our head and get it into our heart. Thank you, God, that this is true. Let's say that. Thank you, God, that this is true. One more time. Thank you, God, that this is true. So what's that? Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe you've received it. We're giving thanks even ahead of what we see. And we can do this with absolute certainty because we were not given a spirit of fear. We're given a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind. That's who we are. So what we are seeking really, in truth, is ourselves. We're seeking to experience ourselves. We're making a conscious connection with who we are at the deepest level. That's the resolution of every problem that we could possibly ever have. Find your center of power and you'll go out and correct the thing. We're not talking about sticking our heads in the sand, pretending things are not, or are just all great, hunky-dory when they're not. Just laying that aside and finding our center of power. We were not given a spirit of fear. Touch that. Find that place. And then go out into your life and deal with it. Okay? Next week we will talk about the truth about healing. Thanks for coming out.